This was the one place that they said the far right would never rise up again. Yeah, I've seen it with my own eyes. People who think that the Allies were on the wrong side of the war and put them forward as the evildoers, marching in their thousands through the streets. Just 1 week before the elections, thousands of supporters flew in from different parts of Europe, bringing their hateful ideologies all into one place. Frightening, disturbing, but most of all, revealing that this could happen in Germany. What does this mean for Europe or the rest of the world if the one country where this type of extremism you thought would never happen has come to pass? It means nowhere is safe.
This is Germany just weeks before the big election. Angry crowds targeting one man, Friedrich Merz. Protesters in Cologne literally stopped his car on its way to the hospital. But what if I told you the real story started elsewhere? Just before these protests erupted, a man from Afghanistan unalived a 2-year-old in Aschaffenburg and the person who tried to save the child. A tragedy that sparked a real discussion about immigration policy in Germany for a few days. The debate quickly shifted into outrage, and now Merz is the villain. Why? Because he passed a proposal in the German parliament, thanks to the far-right AfD. 5-point plan to tighten immigration laws. And now, everyone is talking about the mass protests, about Friedrich Merz being the villain, about the AfD being anti-democratic. And the reason this all started? Water under the bridge. What do you think? Is Merz the real problem, or are we just avoiding the tough conversations?
But I think it's enough, at least for this video, for us to just talk about Germany, because Germany anyway is emblematic of what's going on in Europe. So let's look at the reality of Germany's situation from the perspective of the owners and controllers of global financialized capital, so that we can understand why the OCGFC have lost interest in maintaining the prosperity and the security of Europe. So look, around 15% of the workers in Germany are set to retire within the next 5 years. Within the next 10 years, 20%. By 2028, there will be twice as many retirees as there are new workers. And this ratio just gets worse year upon year the further we project into the future. 20 years ago, in the year 2000, there were roughly 70 million people of working age in Germany. 20 years from now, there will be half that many. The tax base in Germany is shrinking faster than in any other country in Europe. By 2050, consumer spending in Germany will be roughly the same as what consumer spending is right now in Italy. And that, of course, is assuming that the program of economic destabilization and social deterioration does not accelerate, which, of course, there's no reason to believe that it won't.
Germany is is a country with not a very strong birth rate, so we need migrants, otherwise our country will not be running in the future anymore. Therefore, we also need people who do speak German, because unfortunately it's not the most easy language in the world. So we have an interest generally worldwide to have German schools, to also have German universities.
In Germany and across Europe, the population is simply failing to replace itself. And Europe is going to shrink demographically, so that by 2050, there's going to be 100 million fewer people in Europe unless they seriously ramp up immigration. And this demographic collapse, as you can see, means fewer workers, a smaller tax base, and lower consumer spending. In other words, European prosperity is quickly becoming a thing of the past. The continent can no longer sufficiently serve any function for the owners and controllers of global financialized capital, except to be feudal serfs and to turn their continent into a conflict zone so that they can at least channel money through that conflict, or because of that conflict, channel money into the defense and security sectors. In a system of financialized capital, investment in the real economy is less important. Workers are less important. Actual real productive output is less important. And the standard of living for the general population is less important. This is why people care about disparity and the wealth gap. Because the people who are at the top of that pyramid, that 1% or that 10% that I was talking about, who own most of the property in Germany, and who own most of the wealth, 70% of the wealth in Germany, those people are not generally attached to any real productive activity. They're making that money through financialization. So they don't really care what's going on in the society. They don't really care what's going on in the real economy. So they can let it burn. But of course, as it burns, as the standard of living drops, the public's anger, frustration, despair, and desperation has to be channeled somewhere. So I would expect to see in Germany and in Europe a rise in nationalism, a rise in ethnic and nationalistic hostilities, a rise in political radicalization, a rise in crime, and a rise in drug addiction. And of course, as has been perfected in the United States, you will also see a rise in all sorts of diversionary, fake, ideological and cultural battles and feuds and whatnot, all to accelerate the deterioration and to increase the insecurity, to undermine class cohesion and worker solidarity, and to keep the population afraid, distracted, and misdirected until Europeans eventually adapt to occupying a lower status on the global stage. At which point, maybe a century from now, they'll start having babies again. Look, the West created this system. They created these parasitic, nihilistic elites who were born under the flags of Dutch and French and British imperialism, but who have now outgrown flags, and they have no loyalty to any nation. So I mean, if, for example, if white nationalists thought that Western civilization was some sort of sacred pact between all Caucasian people, they have a hard lesson coming. Their civilization gave birth to a patricidal litter of psychopaths who do not see the logic in only applying neoliberal disaster capitalism to non-Western nations when it can be profitably applied to Western nations when those nations display or exhibit signs of vulnerability or weakness. I think this is important to understand, and this is why I keep emphasizing it. Real existing power has transcended political institutions and national governments. Government-focused political activism only strengthens the system of private sector power. Now, I've talked about this for years, and I literally wrote thousands of pages about this when I was trying to advise the opposition in Egypt. We must develop methods of resistance, of opposition, of activism that directly address the private sector. We have to influence, we have to hold accountable, and we have to democratize how the owners and controllers of global financialized capital use their power in society and in the world. But again, the West created this system, they created this problem, and they never heeded any of the alarm bells when they went off. In the process of it growing, when they still had a chance to actually address the problem through traditional political mechanisms. They didn't do that. They allowed it to continue. They allowed it to grow. They allowed it to metastasize and spread until all of their political institutions were completely subsumed. So no, I don't expect any solutions to come from the West. It's late in the day for that. Joseph Borrell's garden is comprised of carnivorous plants, and everyone in that garden is prey, trapped in the thorny vines that they themselves watched grow around their necks. So if, as he said, the rest of the world is a jungle, well, the jungle operates according to a more natural and more balanced order. And those of us in the global south can begin to solve the problem of artificial Western models of economic and political control by rejecting them and by adopting models that are indigenous to our environment.
As I have said repeatedly, in my opinion, the Ukrainian war is a proxy war by the U.S. against Europe, or more precisely by the owners and controllers of global financialized capital against Europe, against the EU, with a particular focus on destabilizing and deindustrializing Germany. During his visit to the United States, the German Minister of Defense announced the signing of a large number of contracts with American arms and defense companies for the purchase of weapons and equipment amounting to approximately 23 billion euros. So they have a weapons shortage. Their industrial base is crumbling by the day. Capital outflows are at record highs. Bankruptcies are at record highs. And supposedly, their proposed solution is to ramp up military production, which is why they are fanning the flames of a potential NATO war with Russia. They want to create this hype. They want to create this panic and this frenzy about war with Russia, so to justify military spending and so on. But at the end of all of that, they end up just funneling money to American weapons manufacturers. Germany is considering mandatory military service for all citizens. So in other words, Germany doesn't have the weapons. As I said in the first story, they don't have the weapons and they don't have the military personnel for war. They don't have the manufacturing capacity to make the weapons, and they don't have the recruits for the army. They don't have willing, voluntary recruits for the army. So their solution to both of those problems: buy weapons from America and conscript the German people. So send your money to America and send your young people to war. And that's being touted, that's being sold as a plan for Germany's political and social and economic security and success. Several German MPs have supported the idea of using Western anti-aircraft systems from NATO countries to destroy Russian missiles over Ukraine. So while Germany is warning of a potential NATO-Russian war, they're actively actually promoting it. They're not warning about it. In fact, they're promoting it by advocating NATO's direct involvement in the Ukrainian conflict militarily. Very plainly, this again is because Europe is on the path to becoming a conflict zone itself, as I've talked about again many, many times. And this will just provide the U.S. weapons sector a new market. They'll just pivot their destabilizing and military and conflict economy to Europe as the productive economy, and all productive economic activity pivots to the global south. The United States, and more specifically, as I said, the owners and controllers of global financialized capital, are very much interested in deindustrializing Europe, destabilizing Europe, impoverishing Europe, and subjugating Europe. The approach of America towards the global south, and the West towards the global south, but specifically America, their approach to the global south, whether it's Latin America, Africa, or Asia, their approach is now going to shift, where they're going to be treating Europe the way they used to treat the global south, and they're going to treat the global south the way they used to treat Europe, including the militarization of Europe and trying to turn Europe into a conflict zone. And we know already from, if you've been following my other content, in my opinion, one of the core characteristics and drivers of the West's violence has always been the competition for material resources. So they are going to decrease Europe's access to material resources and then watch them fight each other.
I have haben gestimmt 325.
Today in Germany, a bitter victory. Friedrich Merz became Germany's 10th post-World War II chancellor and the first to lose an initial secret round of voting. Merz had promised to begin his chancellorship forcefully, and today showed the fragility of his leadership and coalition. But this evening, at the official handover ceremony with outgoing Chancellor Olaf Scholz, Merz brushed it aside.
Was für ein Tag.
Today, what a day, with a few surprises.
Ich nehme diese Verantwortung.
I accept this responsibility with humility, but also with determination and confidence.
Wolfgang Ischinger is the longtime former chairman of the Munich Security Conference and the former German ambassador to the US and UK.
When I look at foreign policy, security, and defense, I see a government being formed today in Berlin, which is going to have, a very, very solid background.
You're gambling with World War III.
Merz's international challenges begin with an American president who's fought openly with European leaders. To this moment, Merz reacted with horror.
In my opinion, it was not a spontaneous reaction to interventions by Zelensky, but obviously a triggered escalation.
When Vice President Vance lectured Europe on democracy in Munich,
what no democracy, American, German, or European, will survive is telling millions of voters that their thoughts and concerns, their aspirations, their pleas for relief are invalid.
Merz imagined a Europe without an American alliance.
For me, the absolute priority will be to strengthen Europe as quickly as possible so that step by step we can really achieve independence from the USA. It's clear the Americans, or at least this group of Americans, this government, cares very little about the fate of Europe.
Someday maybe they're not our allies, right?
And to President Trump's questioning the longevity of transatlantic alliances, Merz questioned the reliability of the U.S. promise to defend Europe with nuclear weapons.
We must be prepared that Donald Trump will no longer fully accept the promise of assistance under the NATO treaty.
Yes, Friedrich Merz has expressed, as most other Europeans have done, serious concerns about the reliability, the credibility of the American position in NATO, about America's changing, evolving positions on Ukraine. The good news is that Friedrich Merz, the new German chancellor, and Donald Trump have not worked together in the past, and they have not had any reason to disagree in the past.
But Merz's most pressing problem after today is perhaps domestic. The leading opposition party is the far-right AfD, or Alternative for Germany. AfD is anti-immigrant, and its leaders have been accused of making anti-Muslim, anti-Semitic, and anti-democratic statements. But last week, after the German intelligence agency labeled AfD extremist, Secretary of State Marco Rubio wrote, "That's not democracy, it's tyranny in disguise." The German Foreign Ministry rebuked him. "We have learnt from our history that right-wing extremism needs to be stopped." But the AfD is polling ahead of Germany's traditional parties. It was excluded from the coalition government and today called Merz weak.
This government starts out in extreme instability, and it will remain unstable.
That's got to be the important #1 goal for this new coalition government, to make sure that traditional conservative voters will leave their frustration behind and will find it acceptable and normal to vote for the classic conservative government led by Friedrich Merz, and not out of frustration or despair for the right-wing party.
Do you believe that this issue will continue to increase tensions between the U.S. and Germany?
One of the points that some of my American friends have not sufficiently understood is that the AfD, which has been befriended by some here in Washington, is, of course, a totally anti-American political party.
The far right and a stagnant economy await Merz. But tonight, he expressed relief that at least he survived the day. For the PBS NewsHour, I'm Nick Schifrin.
The new German leader Merz says he is open to the idea of sending Taurus cruise missiles to Ukraine, and a possible target would be the Crimea Bridge. Could they do it alone?
Anything's possible. Right now, one of the things is that Germany, because they're tied into NATO, the intelligence that would be used to program the Taurus cruise missile comes from an American Department of Defense activity in Europe that consolidates all of the available intelligence and turns it into digital data that's used to create terrain mapping and threat overlays and things like that. And we use that on the Scalp, on the Storm Shadow, and on the Taurus. And to be loaded into the Taurus, you have to have German technicians doing this. There's specific things about that. And so basically, Germany would have to replace the American intelligence, and they would have to find a source of satellite data. It's out there. And then they would have to create their own, digitally inclined people to turn that into the little digital inputs that go into the Taurus. But then what happens is that it's a German missile specifically given to Ukraine to attack critical Russian infrastructure, and it's being targeted by the Germans, loaded by the Germans, and the only thing that's not happening is the Germans aren't pushing the execute button. Maria Zakharova just came out and said what Russia's been saying all along. If you use a Taurus missile to attack the Crimea Bridge, Germany will be struck back. And that will happen. The Taurus missile will promote Oreshniks to land on German soil to take out German factories and decision points and things of that nature. It will be an attack against Russia, and Russia will respond in kind, which is why Pistorius and other Germans are saying, we ain't giving the Taurus to Ukraine. There's a reason why Scholz didn't do it. And we'll make sure that Merz understands the reason too. And the reason is Germany will be bombed by Russia, and that Germany will have no Article 5 protection, because Germany will have committed an act of war against Russia, and the United States isn't going to sit there and commit suicide over that. So Germany will be hit by Russia, and there's nothing NATO will do about it, and Germany doesn't want that to happen. Therefore, Germany hasn't sent the Taurus, and Merz isn't going to send a single Taurus to there. They've already said, Pistorius already said it isn't going to happen. And other opposition leaders have said it's just not going to happen. There's a reason why. And we will explain that to Mr. Merz once he becomes chancellor. And the reason is that Germany will cease to exist. Not cease to exist, but they will be struck, directly.
I stepped on you. I apologize, Scott.
Okay, I had to correct myself because I got a little over enthusiastic with the idea of dead Germans. It's sort of in my DNA. My family, killed Nazis in the past, and sort of looking forward to the opportunity to maybe do it again in my lifetime. Come on, Germany, give us an excuse.
Which countries are neighbors of Germany? There are Denmark, the Netherlands, Belgium, Luxembourg, France, Switzerland, Austria, Czechia, and Poland bordering Germany, making it the country with the most neighbors in Europe.
Oh shit. Did you know that Germany is heavily dependent on Russia? After Russia invaded Ukraine, the European Union imposed severe sanctions on Russia, putting Germany in a difficult position. Germany's imports of natural gas and oil largely come from Russia. Meanwhile, Russia began cutting natural gas supplies and raising prices to pressure Germany to ease sanctions. Previously, Germany could rely on supplies from the Netherlands, but the Netherlands is planning to close the Groningen gas field. This has made Russia the primary supplier for Germany. Germany once had a strong nuclear energy program, but chose to phase it out after the Fukushima disaster in 2011, aiming to close all nuclear power plants by 2022. These factors prompted Russia and Germany to collaborate on the Nord Stream pipeline, as it was the cheapest alternative for Germany at that time. These factors have led to increased cooperation between Russia and Germany in the energy.
If Russia invades, that means tanks or troops crossing the border of Ukraine again. Then there will be no longer a Nord Stream 2. We will bring an end to it.
How will you do that exactly, since the project and control of the project is within Germany's control?
We will, I promise you, we'll be able to do it.
The Nord Stream pipelines, of course, were blown up by the US and NATO allies, and now a US economic war is conducted against the submissive allies in Europe. Seymour Hersh's fine analysis tells how the destruction was planned and done, but the conclusion is unsurprising. The US, with very important Norwegian assistance, committed the crime against a friendly allied country, Germany, and other European countries.
Is it true that the war between Ukraine and Russia happened because the US doesn't want Russia to supply oil to Europe, which goes through Ukraine? For the most part, yes. That's a simplified explanation of why the war happened and why the US blew up the Nord Stream pipeline, which was how Russia was shipping energy to Europe. Because now that the pipeline's been blown up, European countries have to turn to US corporations for natural gas and whatnot. But also, the United States wanted to use Ukraine as a proxy to attack and harm Russia. Because prior to 2014, there was a government elected in Ukraine that US intelligence deemed as being too friendly with Russia. So they dumped $1 bajillion into the country to help foment a coup, which was led by the country's extreme far right. After this happened, groups like the Azov Battalion, an explicitly ethno-nationalist neo-Nazi group, was added to Ukraine's actual military forces. This ignited a civil war in the country as the ethno-nationalist extreme right forces began fighting with ethnic Russians who live in eastern Ukraine in what's known as the Donbass. NATO and the US also began a huge military buildup in Ukraine at this time. And Russia saw this as a threat because they had warned NATO not to expand all the way to their borders many times. They actually said repeatedly that Ukraine is a red line. If you add Ukraine to NATO, we're going to do something. And they did. They launched this special military operation in 2022. So the whole thing was provoked by the United States and NATO, who see Russia as a threat to their economic interests because, like you said, they're selling natural gas to Europe and other countries who the US doesn't like. And they also see Russia as a threat to their interests politically because Putin has shown that he won't be bullied or told what to do by the West. And I know this version of events is pretty far off from what you hear from the corporate media, and that's because they're lying to you, but I'm telling you the truth. At least I'm doing my best to tell you the truth. They're not. They're trying to manipulate you. You can make a choice. You don't have to be manipulated by imperialism. Hashtag abolish NATO.
The idea of sending Europeans into Ukraine and keeping the Americans out is a recipe for disaster. I can tell you now that there will be people who will write the headlines, oh, we're supposed to play the role of the Americans, North Koreans. We're going to be sent into the battle. What are we supposed to, I mean, our European soldiers, what are they supposed to do exactly if at some point Russia starts aggressing again? If America is not also on the ground there in Ukraine, and if an American president, doesn't have to be Donald Trump, will say, I told you this is a European issue, you handle it. We cannot handle it. We don't have the power, we don't have the deterrence capability, etc. In other words, what I would suggest is that there should be maybe some European troops, but I think you made the key point. It takes a lot of imagination to think of a situation where Vladimir Putin would agree to a ceasefire or peace settlement that would involve the stationing, the actual deployment of troops from NATO countries, including France, Germany, UK, etc., in Ukraine. He might as well agree to NATO membership if he does that. In other words, my solution would be troops from India. As a German, I would say troops from China. Putin is not going to start a war against Chinese troops on the Ukrainian side. Troops from Indonesia, troops from Brazil, and of course maybe some European troops, but not dividing NATO.
They just crossed the line and there is no going back. 4 countries, Germany, United States, the United Kingdom and France. They just unlocked something terrifying. They've officially removed all restrictions. Ukraine is now allowed to strike inside Russia using long-range Western weapons. And this is not a rumor. Germany's own chancellor confirmed it. No more range limits from us, the Americans, the Brits or the French. Now let that sink in. NATO's 4 most powerful countries are now actively supporting strikes on Russian territory. You think Russia will let that slide? Every missile that lands inside Russia now carries a silent signature. Not just made in the West, but authorized by the West. This isn't proxy war anymore. This is direct provocation. And here's the fear no one wants to say out loud. We are one mistake away from global war. One strike too deep, one Russian response too strong, and one NATO reaction too fast. A chain reaction that can't be stopped. And unlike wars of the past, this one comes with hypersonics, cyber blackouts, and nuclear doctrines that start early, not late. You won't get a warning. You'll get a flash and silence. Because history doesn't scream before it breaks, it whispers. And right now is whispering loud. The countdown has already begun. Most people just haven't heard the ticking yet.
Темная ночь, только пули свистят по степи, только ветер гудит в проводах, тускло звезды мерцают.
Ukraine can now strike deep into Russia with Western weapons. For over 2 years, Ukraine's Western allies told them, defend your land, but don't strike inside Russia. That rule just changed. Germany's Chancellor Friedrich Merz confirmed that restrictions on using Western weapons to hit targets inside Russia were quietly lifted months ago. And Putin is not happy about this.
Если это решение будет принято, это будет означать не что иное, как прямое участие стран НАТО, Соединенных Штатов, европейских стран в войне на Украине.
Ukraine already had drones capable of striking deep into Russian territory, but now it can also use more powerful Western missiles to do so. For a long time, Ukrainian forces were fighting with their hands tied, limited to defending against Russia's brutal invasion. But now they can target Russian command centers and supply hubs deep across the border in places like Bryansk and Kursk.
Germany crosses the line, lifts all restrictions on Ukraine's use of long-range weapons, ignoring Moscow's warnings. In a move likely to escalate the conflict in Ukraine and threaten European security, German Chancellor Friedrich Merz has announced that Berlin will no longer impose any range restrictions on weapons it supplies to Kiev. This controversial shift in policy opens the door for Ukrainian forces to conduct deep strikes into Russian territory with German-made weapons, including the highly destructive Taurus missile system, which has a range of up to 500 kilometers. The announcement made at the Europa Forum on Monday signals Germany's willingness to risk direct confrontation with Russia. Chancellor Merz stated that Ukraine must be able to defend itself effectively and implied that limiting Kiev's strikes to its own territory is inadequate. He confirmed that Berlin now stands aligned with London, Paris and Washington in removing any constraints on the range of weapons delivered to the Ukrainian military. This declaration comes despite repeated and stern warnings from Moscow. Russian President Vladimir Putin and Kremlin officials have long stated that permitting Ukraine to carry out long-range strikes with NATO, provided weapons, especially with targeting data supplied by Western satellites, would make those nations direct participants in the conflict. Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov condemned Merz's comments as dangerous and contrary to the spirit of ongoing peace efforts. If such decisions have been made, they run entirely counter to our goal of achieving a political settlement, he said. The recklessness of this policy shift becomes even more apparent in light of Russia's updated nuclear doctrine, amended in late 2023. Under the new framework, a coordinated attack on Russia by a non-nuclear state, such as Ukraine, backed by a nuclear power or bloc, such as NATO, may now be interpreted as a joint attack, potentially justifying a nuclear response. President Putin has repeatedly emphasized that while Russia does not seek escalation and views nuclear weapons as a last resort, it will not tolerate existential threats. The Kremlin's patience, as it stands, is wearing thin. While the West claims to support peace, this decision undermines the recent breakthrough in Russian-Ukrainian diplomacy. After over 3 years, both sides have resumed direct negotiations, including a proposed 1,000 for 1,000 prisoner swap and the development of a ceasefire framework. Russia, as stated by Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov, is finalizing a memorandum outlining the path to a lasting peace. Berlin's move not only threatens to sabotage this progress, but puts Europe itself in the crosshairs of a potential catastrophe. By allowing long-range Taurus missiles capable of striking deep within Russian territory, Germany may be dragging itself into the very conflict it once cautiously avoided. If such missiles are used against sensitive or strategic Russian targets, the consequences could be irreversible. In aligning itself more aggressively with Washington and London, Germany has turned its back on diplomacy and instead chosen a path of escalation. As President Putin warned previously, those who provoke Russia may soon find themselves responsible for outcomes they cannot control.
Get a Nazi rule, which I stand by, will have exceptions. And you've alluded to several throughout history. And I'm sure today in Germany, there will be people who are the exception. But if you work at a German munitions plant and you get up in the morning and you go to work and you do your job and you make munitions knowing that those munitions will be used either to go to Ukraine to kill Russians or to be part of a revitalized German military whose orientation is to the east, you're a Nazi. Got it? I don't know how to make it any clearer than that. If you're a German farmer who gets up in the morning and goes to work and you grow crops, and these crops are used to feed a nation that has armament factories that are producing weapons that go to Ukraine to kill Russians or used to revitalize a new militarized Germany, you're a Nazi. If you work in an auto factory and you produce vehicles that allow Germans to move around autobahns that are produced by workers who build the streets, and you do all this to facilitate factories that produce weapons that go to Ukraine and kill Russians or to revitalize the German military, you're a Nazi. Got it? I don't know how to make it any more clear than that. So as long as Germany collectively, as a nation, continues to support the policies that's embarked on, there ain't no difference between you today and the Germany of the 1930s. None whatsoever. And your fate will be the same. Prove me wrong. Go to the streets. Carry out a revolution. Show me you're not Nazis. Get rid of your government. Overthrow your government. Do something. Be those exceptions to the rule. Otherwise, if you just sit at home, pick your nose, eat schnitzel, you're a Nazi. I hope I made it clear. But, you know, come on, Germany, grow up. What kind of child are you? Really? Oh, no. Big bad America told me to do this. I had no choice to do it. Grow up. You're in the Bundeswehr. You're a soldier, and you can't stand up and stare somebody in the face and tell them to back the hell off. Then take the damn flag off your shoulder, throw on the American flag, and admit you're just a colony of America. Pull down the German flag over the Bundestag, raise the stars and stripes, and call yourself the 51st state. Bunch of cowards. That's the most cowardly thing I've ever heard. You either are or you aren't. You're either German or you're not. I don't want to hear, I'm occupied. If you're truly occupied, if you truly believe this, because I'm calling you out, you hypocrites, because you don't believe it. It's just an excuse. Oh, we're occupied. Then throw them out. Throw out the American soldiers. Do what an occupied people do to the occupiers. But you don't, because you're not occupied. Because you allow the Americans there. You want the Americans there. You need the Americans there. Because you're little children, you're little lost children, and you have to have an adult holding your hands as you cross the street. You're pathetic. I'm sorry. Come on, Germany, grow up, be a nation, be people, take control. But oh no, we're occupied. You're cowards. And that, by the way, is the foundational aspect of being a Nazi. Because Nazis aren't brave. Nazis are cowards. Nazis are people that sit there and live their life as the ash comes down from the concentration camp next door on their shoulder, and they take it off their shoulders and pretend it didn't happen. Nazis are the people that sit there and turn their eyes away as the trainload of Jews go through the train station, and you hear their cries, but you close your ears because you're a coward. That's what a Nazi is. Germany is a nation of cowards. Germany is a nation of Nazis. Sorry about that, guys. If you don't like it, do something different. But don't sit here and cry to me. Grow up. I mean, really, become adults. Take America out of your damn country if you feel you're occupied. You're not occupied. You're pathetic. You surrendered a long time ago. You stopped understanding what it meant to be German. You think it meant to be German, you have to have a strong military and march on the east. No, no, no. To be German, you have to care about Germany. To be German, you have to do things for Germany. For Germany. Not for anybody else. And if you don't study history and you don't understand why it is so frickin' perverted that Germany is once again in Ukraine trying to kill Russians, get the hell out of here.
just explain in 2 minutes the Ukraine war. This is not an attack by Putin on Ukraine in the way that we are told every day. This started in 1990. James Baker III, our Secretary of State, said to Mikhail Gorbachev, NATO will not move 1 inch eastward if you agree to German unification. The U.S. then cheated on this, already starting in 1994, when Clinton signed off on a plan to expand NATO all the way to Ukraine. This is when the so-called neocons took power. The expansion of NATO started in 1999 with Poland, Hungary, and Czech Republic. Then the U.S. led the bombing of Serbia in 1999. That was a use of NATO to bomb a European capital, Belgrade, 78 straight days to break the country apart. The Russians didn't like that very much. But even Putin started out pro-European, pro-American, actually asked maybe we should join NATO when there was still the idea of some kind of mutually respectful relationship. 9/11 came, then came Afghanistan, and the Russians said, yeah, we'll support you. We understand to root out terror. In 2002, the United States unilaterally walked out of the anti-ballistic missile treaty. What it did was trigger the U.S. putting in missile systems in Eastern Europe that Russia views as a dire, direct threat to national security by making possible a decapitation strike of missiles that are a few minutes away from Moscow. In 2004-05, we engaged in a soft regime change operation in Ukraine, the so-called First Color Revolution. But in 2009, Yanukovych won the election, and he became president, and in 2010, on the basis of neutrality for Ukraine. So in February 22nd, 2014, the United States participated actively in the overthrow of Yanukovych. They intercepted a really ugly call between Victoria Nuland and the U.S. ambassador to Ukraine, Jeffrey Piat, who's a senior State Department official till today. And they talked about regime change. So they made the new government. The U.S. then said, okay, now NATO's really going to enlarge. And Putin kept saying, stop. You promised no NATO enlargement. Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Bulgaria, Romania, Slovakia, Slovenia, 7 more countries in the not 1 inch eastward. On December 15, 2021, Putin put on the table a draft Russia-U.S. security agreement. The basis of it is no NATO enlargement. The special military operation started, and 5 days later, Zelensky says, okay, neutrality. And then the United States and Britain said, no way. You guys fight on. We got your back. We don't have your front, you're all gonna die, but we got your back. That's 600,000 deaths now of Ukrainians since Boris Johnson flew to Kyiv to tell them to be brave. Absolutely ghastly. We have to understand, we're not dealing with, as we're told every day, with this madman like Hitler. This is complete bogus, fake history that is a purely PR narrative of the U.S. government. We're playing games here. So, God forbid, a nuclear power comes at us. I don't know what's going to happen. But we
werden unsere militärische Unterstützung fortsetzen und wir werden sie ausbauen, damit sich die Ukraine jetzt und in Zukunft eben gegen diese russische Aggression weiter zur Wehr setzen kann. Unsere Verteidigungsminister werden heute eine Absichtserklärung über die Beschaffung weitreichender Waffensysteme aus ukrainischer Produktion, sogenannter Long-Range Fires, unterzeichnen. Es wird hierbei keine Reichweitenbeschränkungen geben. Die Ukraine kann sich damit vollumfänglich verteidigen, auch gegen militärische Ziele außerhalb des eigenen Staatsgebiets. Gehen Sie davon aus, dass die Weigerung der russischen Seite, Gespräche zu führen, die Weigerung, einen Waffenstillstand einzuhalten, jetzt wirklich Konsequenzen hat?
Germany's new silence on arms is sending shockwaves. Kiev has secured over $6 billion in fresh military aid from Berlin. Germany says the money will be used for joint missile manufacturing, which will include long-range weapons. But the fate of Taurus remains a mystery. Russia vows a dramatic, asymmetric response if Germany crosses the red line. Clearly, the tensions are peaking. Our next report telling you more.
As the battles intensify across eastern Ukraine, Germany has introduced a shift in its stance. Breaking from the West's usual arms shipment announcement, Berlin now declares it will no longer publicly confirm what weapons it supplies to Kiev. This seismic policy shift comes after fierce clashes around Kharkiv and Donetsk, where Russia is pushing hard, sensing cracks in Western unity. But Berlin's stance is now enraging Moscow.
Wir werden deshalb den Druck auf Russland.
We will continue to increase the pressure on Russia. We are doing this in order to weaken the war machine of Moscow. But we are doing it also to open to path to negotiations.
Chancellor Merz's government has lifted all range restrictions on arms sent to Kiev, empowering the Ukrainian forces to strike military targets deep inside Russia, a move that has drawn a sharp warning from Moscow. Yet, Merz maintains a strategic silence on the most potent weapon in Germany's arsenal, the Taurus missile. The Taurus is a game changer. With a range exceeding 500 kilometers, it can hit fortified bunkers and command centers, targets previously considered out of reach for Ukrainian forces. Now, if Germany sends Taurus, then Ukraine can use it to target the Russian capital. The missile's advanced navigation and bunker-busting warhead makes it a nightmare for Russian planners, who have spent months preparing electronic countermeasures in anticipation of its arrival. The Kremlin warns any Ukrainian strike using German Taurus missiles will be treated as Germany's direct involvement in the war.
So Germany's direct involvement in the war is already clear. Germany is sliding down the same trajectory it followed a couple of times in the last century, down towards its collapse. I hope that responsible politicians in this country will make right conclusions and stop the madness after all.
Moscow is sharpening the tone. The deputy head of Russian Parliament Duma says that the Russian forces will shoot down the Taurus and have Germany in its crosshairs for its introduction. But with Germany refusing to name the weapons it will supply to Ukraine, the retaliation becomes a guessing game. This is a dangerous new precedent. The West has always underscored transparency as a signal of its resolve in its support for Ukraine. Now, as Germany flips the script, Moscow is being left to imagine the worst. In geopolitics, silence can speak louder than any explosion. Bureau Report, WION, World is One.
You know that Donald Trump's grandfather, Friedrich, illegally emigrated to the United States, fleeing Bavaria in fear? Did you know that was the exact reason he was so uncomfortable in his meeting with German Chancellor Friedrich Merz? Now, many foreign leaders will get on their knees and grovel with some ridiculous golden gift, but what Friedrich did was he brought a birth certificate. That birth certificate was a subtle rebuke of everything Donald Trump is currently doing because it was the birth certificate of his grandfather. It was political brilliance because Friedrich Trump fled Bavaria at 16 years old in the middle of the night in fear because he didn't did not want to be conscripted. You could say that Donald comes from a long line of draft dodgers. Bavaria called for 3 years compulsory military service, but that was not for Friedrich. When he came to the US in 1885, he'd become a citizen in 1892, and he would change his name from Friedrich to Frederick. And all Friedrich wanted to do in America really was to make money, so he went out west and spent his time taking advantage of the Klondike gold rush. He wasn't doing any mining, he was in fact mining the miners, setting up restaurants and hotels which doubled as brothels. In 1901, he went back home and he married a woman named Elizabeth Christ. We'll go back to America for a bit, but in 1905 they were done with America. They went back to Bavaria and tried to permanently resettle. Government remembered the way that he fled the country, so they put out a royal decree for his deportation. Begged for mercy, saying this would upset his wife, she wanted to stay there. He had a young child, he asked for someone to care. Despite his legal problems in his own country, he'd come back to the US, settle in Queens, where he would eventually die. Sticking with the concepts of immigrants and rioting and public disturbance, let's talk about Friedrich's son, Fred, who was Donald's father. Fred was arrested in May of 1927 at the age of 21. This was reported in the New York Times. It was centered around an unauthorized march of the Klan with over 1,000 robed Klansmen marching through Jamaica, Queens. There was then a free-for-all battle. There was a big fight between those guys and the police in the middle of the streets. Fred Trump was arrested on the charge of refusing to disperse. He would not be charged with the crime and he would ultimately be released, but this is always a funny detail when you think about the Trump family. The thing is, all this history really upsets the Trump family. In The Art of the Deal, Donald himself wrote that his grandfather came here from Sweden. What a strange lie to tell, isn't it? Because the truth is, none of Donald's grandparents were born in the United States, and only one of his parents was born in the US. Because his mother, Mary Ann MacLeod Trump, was born in Scotland. She came to the US when she was 18 years old. Came here in 1930, she'd become a naturalized citizen in 1942. All this combines to let you know why little Donnie here looked like he was about to shit himself in the Oval Office.
What do you expect from Germany and what do you expect from the Chancellor?
Well, first of all, I'm glad to meet because I've been dealing with the Chancellor and he's a very good man to deal with. He's difficult, I would say. Can I say that? It's a positive. Go ahead. You wouldn't want me to say you're easy, right? No. He's a very great representative of Germany. I think all we want is just going to have a good relationship. The rest will just sort of follow very easily. We'll have a good trade deal. I mean, I guess that will be mostly determined by the European Union, but you're a very big part of that, so you'll be involved. But we'll end up hopefully with a trade deal or we'll do something, we'll do the tariffs. I mean, I'm okay with the tariffs or we make a deal with the trade, and I guess that's what we're discussing now.
Mr. President,
please, go ahead.
Mr. President?
No, not you.
Is Germany doing enough on defense? Is Germany doing enough on defense?
What?
Defense spending.
Is Germany doing enough on defense spending?
The Chancellor wants to.
Is Germany doing enough?
The Chancellor wants to spend 3.5.
Well, I don't know. I mean, I haven't discussed it very much. I know that you're spending more money on defense now, and quite a bit more money. That's a positive thing. I'm not sure that General MacArthur would have said it's positive. He wouldn't like it, but I sort of think it's good. You understand what I mean by that? Right? He made a statement: "Never let Germany rearm." And I said, I always think about that when he says, "Sir, we're spending more money on defense." I say, "Ooh, is that a good thing or a bad thing?" I think it's a good thing. But, at least to a certain point. There'll be a point when I'll say, "Please don't arm anymore, if you don't mind." We'll be watching him.
Mr. President.
Yeah, Biden, you said Biden.
This is the birth certificate of Donald Trump's grandfather, born in 1869, close to Bad Dürkheim, right? Yeah. That's called and his Christian name was Friedrich. Right? That's serious German. Serious right? German name. That's serious German. Bad Dürkheim is serious German. But I want to thank you very much for. First of all, I want to thank you for that. That's my beautiful. Thank you very much. Thank you again. Fantastic.
We'll take one more now. I would like to have a question to the Chancellor as well, because do you agree with the analogy the President made on the war between Russia and Ukraine as being a fight between two kids? Is that how you view that as well? And what do you actually want the US President to do in this?
Well, I think we both agree on this war and how terrible this war is going on, and we are both looking for ways to stop it very soon. And I told the President before we came in that he is the key person in the world who can really do that now by putting pressure on Russia And we will have this debate later on again, how we can proceed jointly between the Europeans and the Americans. And I think we are all we are having the duty to do something on that now, to stop it after 3.5 years, which is really terrible. Look at the kids, the kids which were kidnapped from Ukraine to Russia. This is all terrible. And so we are talking about instruments, measures, what we can do. And my personal view is clear on that. We are on the side of Ukraine, and we are trying to get them stronger and stronger just to make Putin stop this war. And this is our approach.
We get satellite pictures of the war field, and you don't even like to look at them, right?
It's terrible.
So
it's really
bodies, arms, heads, legs all over the place. You've never seen anything like it. It's so ridiculous.
And this is only by Russian weapons against Ukraine. This had never happened with Ukraine weapons against Russia. Never. Ukraine is only targeting military targets, not civilians, not private, not energy infrastructure. So this is the difference, and that's the reason why we are trying to do more on Russia, how to stop this war.
Well, in this case, I'm talking about the battlefield, the soldiers on soldiers. But you could also say that too with the cities. The cities are being hit also. So it's a terrible, terrible thing. All right. Somebody said autopen.
Putin loses patience with Germany, and World War III could be imminent. Russian President Vladimir Putin lashed out at Germany after Berlin authorized Ukraine to use German weapons in direct attacks on Russian territory. According to Putin, this is an extremely dangerous step that could unleash an unprecedented escalation. And this isn't just rhetoric. The Kremlin made it clear that this provocation breaks all boundaries, and former President Dmitry Medvedev bluntly warned against it. World War III would be horrific. From Berlin, the message is also clear. Germany has already activated its military machinery. General Carsten Breuer has ordered a total modernization of the armed forces, including electronic warfare, air defense, and precision strikes. They are even considering returning to compulsory military service. Putin accuses Germany of repeating the mistakes of the past, and his rhetoric already sounds like an open challenge. We are on the brink of a new global conflict, and the most disturbing thing is that this time it's not just Ukraine, it's Germany, and with it all of Europe.
Germany's decision to greenlight Ukraine's use of long-range missiles deep inside Russia has ignited a powder keg, with Moscow issuing a chilling warning of nuclear retaliation. The Kremlin branded the move dangerous and escalatory, accusing NATO allies, Germany, France, UK, and US, of dragging the war into a perilous abyss. Putin himself warned that strikes backed by nuclear powers could provoke a catastrophic Russian response, pointing to Moscow's updated nuclear doctrine that lowers the trigger for such action. Chancellor Friedrich Merz confirmed Ukraine can now target Russian military sites, even Moscow, with Western weapons like Taurus missiles. This bold move risks a direct NATO-Russia clash, as Moscow sees it as outright Western aggression. The US and UK's earlier approval for Ukraine to use their long-range systems already prompted Russia to flex its hypersonic Oreshnik missile. NATO remains defiant, but experts warn Europe's security hangs by a thread, with missile defenses untested against Russia's arsenal. The stakes are apocalyptic.
Germany backs down to Russia and will not be giving Ukraine the Taurus cruise missile. A week ago, Germany announces the Taurus cruise missile was going to be gifted to Ukraine. These missiles, which are nearly impossible to take down, prompted Putin to threaten Berlin, Germany, saying if a German missile hit Russia, a Russian missile would hit Berlin, Germany. And today, the German minister shocked Zelensky to his face, telling him they're not getting the missile. And you can see the exact moment that Zelensky realized that NATO is not going to war for him.
Germany has put out a stark warning to the rest of Europe. You need to start preparing now for the United States to remove any kind of support, not only from Ukraine, but from our continent. This was said from the German defense minister, who also said to reporters, yes, that's right. That would be so, and we have to deal with it. We have to look at how much support drops and whether Europeans can compensate for it. His announcement is based off of things that we're actually seeing, like U.S. Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth. An announcement just a few days ago said that certain support for Ukraine would be removed from next year's budget. Something to keep in mind is that Donald Trump's administration did say to NATO, we need you all to be paying more into this. You know, right now, that number was 2% of what you could put in. That needs to increase to 5% over the next decade. Some countries are over that number right now, more towards 3 or 4. The United States is doing this because they're footing, as they say, most of the bill, and they would like other countries in which these conflicts are taking place to have more put into it. My thought on all the matter is we should be helping Ukraine as much as possible, because if we can't stop Russia inside of Ukraine, then eventually we're going to have to send troops and spend even more money. Right now, Ukraine's just asking for more weapons and asking for more things on the ground so that they can push the Russians back and finally put pressure onto Russia. They're even asking for more sanctions, something that could be done at any moment. We spoke to senators this week about that. We just need to get things passed here in the Senate and get more weapons to Ukraine, so that way we can avoid what everyone says could be World War III.
Fucking damn it! Oh, fucking damn it! Oh, fucking damn it!
If we trap him in a corner and he feels his whole existence is at threat as leader of the Russian regime, then that is a very dangerous time for us all.
I mean, just look at how absurd this is. He's saying, correctly, that if you push Russia into a corner, it's not really wise. It's dangerous. It's dangerous for Europe. It's dangerous for everybody. They have 6,000 nuclear weapons. It's a nuclear power. You don't want to put them into a corner. Well, that's what you've been doing. That's what you've been deliberately doing, knowingly doing, completely conscious of the risks. You were warned in the United States, in Europe, the UK, warned by your intelligence services that Russia sees Ukraine as a red line. Ukraine joining NATO is a red line. They see it as an existential threat to Russia. You've been knowing that for 14 years. And you've insistently been pushing them into a corner. And now you're saying, if we push them into a corner, it's dangerous. That's what you've been doing. That's what you did do. Knowingly, deliberately, calculatedly.
I think it's really important. This is a dangerous time, a dangerous time across Europe. It's really important this doesn't become a conflict between NATO and Russia. And Putin can't turn it into an issue where it looks as though we are battling against Russia.
And now you're saying, we don't want this to become a conflict between NATO and Russia. Then why did you insist on the right of Ukraine to become a member of NATO? Why? Because it would immediately be a military conflict. None of you want to send troops. You don't want to send troops. You don't want to send fighter jets. You don't want to have a no-fly zone, because that will immediately become a military conflict between European countries, between NATO and Russia. Well, if you allowed Ukraine to become a member of NATO, then it would be. You would have to do that. You would have to send troops. You would have to send fighter jets. You would have to have a no-fly zone. You would have to do all of the things that you don't want to do now if you let Ukraine into NATO. But you don't want to do those things, which means you don't want Ukraine to be in NATO. If you had just said that from the beginning, then you wouldn't have this problem, because that is precisely the thing that Russia has always opposed and has always let you know is a red line for them. And it's the exact same thing, that one precise thing, that the West, that the U.S. refused to negotiate prior to this conflict. We can talk about everything, but we will not talk about the possibility, it's completely off the table, that Ukraine will be just a neutral country and not a member of NATO. We're not going to even discuss that. We have to continue to hold out the future possibility of Ukraine joining NATO. When the reality is, none of you want to go to war with your own troops, with your own fighter jets, against Russia for the sake of Ukraine. So you don't want them to be NATO. You don't want to be obliged to go to war with your troops and your fighter jets against Russia. Correctly, you shouldn't want to, but you don't want to do it But you would have to do it if you let him join NATO, which means you were never going to let him join NATO in the first place. So why didn't you just say that? The entire thing is fabricated for the purpose of what is happening. What is happening now is what they wanted to have happen, because it was easily averted, could easily have been avoided. Everybody knows how to avoid it. Everyone knew how to avoid it for the last 14 years. Everyone saw it coming for 14 years, and you pursued it diligently until it happened. Meaning that what is happening now is exactly what you wanted to have happen.
What we're doing is we're supporting Ukraine in its independence and its self-determination and in its sovereignty.
I just wanted to say one thing about hypocrisy. You can talk about the hypocrisy of the West, you can talk about the hypocrisy of the United States and all of that, and it's all true, but you're not learning the lesson from that. To say, well, you didn't care about national sovereignty when you invaded Iraq, you didn't care about national sovereignty and independence when you invaded Afghanistan or any of the other places, you didn't care about it then, why do you care about it now? That's true, that's all true. That is hypocritical. But it's only hypocritical if you actually think that the rhetoric means something to them. The principles don't mean anything to them. They didn't believe in national sovereignty when they invaded Iraq. They didn't believe in it when they invaded Afghanistan. And they don't believe in it now. That has nothing to do with the West's response, the collective West's response engineered by the United States to the conflict in Ukraine. It has nothing to do with it. That's just the sales pitch. That's just a rhetorical cover for a project of destabilization that has been pursued knowingly, calculatedly, deliberately for 14 years.
EU, the UK, all of America's Western so-called allies, they need to make an urgent reassessment of their relationship with the United States. Of course, this also means that the people of those countries in the EU and so on, they need to make a serious reevaluation of their own leaders, all of whom are just going along with America's plans, and who seem to be the only leaders left in the world who still think it's a good idea to follow Washington's orders. You know, 60% of Europeans no longer feel that America is a reliable ally or partner. That puts EU leadership at odds with the population in this regard. Even the European Council on Foreign Relations said that America's interests and Europe's interests no longer align, particularly on trade and security issues. And of course, they're right. America has been pursuing a systematic campaign of destabilization across Europe for years, and particularly since the Ukraine war and the Russian sanctions. I've been talking about that since the beginning. Thanks to these policies, Europe is in a death spiral. Bankruptcies are at record highs, business closures, home foreclosures, companies relocating, factories shutting down. I mean, Germany is in a rapid state of deindustrialization. America is trying to pit Europe against Russia, pit the UK against Russia, which is depriving the whole continent of affordable energy, and it's prompting militarization, which they can't afford, all of which is for the benefit of American oil and gas companies and for the U.S. weapons sector. People are becoming radicalized. Extremism of all stripes is emerging. You know, Europeans feel that their societies are more polarized than ever. Protests are taking place more frequently and are turning violent more frequently. Repression is getting worse. It's getting more severe. Terrorist attacks are increasing, particularly from far-right groups. The International Center for Counterterrorism attributes this, at least in part, to the war in Ukraine and the influx of neo-Nazis and other extremists and the flood of small arms that were supposedly being sent to Ukraine. The whole continent is sliding into a irreversible strife, and that's blatantly by American design. The U.S. is also trying to drive a wedge between Europe and China, even though Europe desperately needs Chinese investment, Chinese capital, Chinese technology, and the Chinese market for their own exports. And again, European leaders are just going along with this in defiance of their own populations and obviously against the interests of their own people, because EU leaders are subservient to Washington neocons. America always intended for the war in Ukraine to spread. They never intended for Ukraine to win. The whole point was always to accelerate Europe's destabilization, their isolation, and their deterioration. And so far, no one is doing anything whatsoever to pump the brakes. So yes, America and its so-called Western allies, the UK, the EU, are really at a make or break point. You know, people always talk about being on the right side of history. Well, Europe needs to start making decisions on the right side of the future, because their relationship with the United States has frankly put them into an existential crisis. The fact is, BRICS is building an alternative to the old US-led world order, and Britain and the EU need to understand this. The global system of the 20th century is a relic. The balance of power no longer favors the G7, and the Global South is the only vehicle left with wheels still on it and with a working engine. And Europe needs to hitch a ride with them if they don't want Uncle Sam to drive them off a cliff, because that's where they're going now. I mean, I know it's going to be a traumatic adjustment for these Westerners, for these Europeans, accepting the fact that your so-called Western civilization and your societies are actually unsustainable, and your great American protector and benefactor is actually cannibalizing you. But on the other hand, turning to the Global South for your survival isn't really anything new. I mean, you never would have actually even been anything of significance without your imperialism and colonization of Africa and Asia. So the truth is that you've always been a dependency, and you still are. The difference is that you used to get to pretend that you weren't the dependent one, because you used to be able to just steal from the Global South in order to prop up your societies. But you've always been dependent. So there's no real change there. Just an attitude adjustment is necessary, and an acceptance of your real status vis-a-vis the Global South. You will have to humble yourselves to some degree to cooperate with BRICS. But believe me, it's better than the utter humiliation that you're going to suffer if you continue cooperating with the Americans.
Security and peace, or peace with security. And how to end the carnage on the killing fields of Ukraine, where lives are being devoured by a ruthless mechanical precision. Let us reject outright Donald Trump's predatory seizure of Ukraine's natural resources. Let us campaign to get the whole of Europe, not just one country or another, out of NATO immediately. There is no point in NATO. It has been proven. Donald Trump has proven it. We should have proven it before Donald Trump. But we need to get out of NATO. Brussels needs to throw NATO into the sea. Let us plot a course to a non-aligned but never neutral Europe. A non-aligned but never neutral Europe. Offering to relax sanctions as carrot and return to Russia its $300 billion of frozen assets. We should immediately commence negotiations with the Kremlin and with Beijing on a comprehensive strategic arrangement between Europe, Russia, and China. An arrangement within which Ukraine becomes, in the next 100 years, what Austria was during the Cold War. What was Austria during the Cold War? It was sovereign, it was neutral, democratic, and as integrated with the rest of Europe as its citizens needed and desired. That's what the plan for Ukraine should be. On green prosperity, we must fiercely oppose military Keynesianism. It is unsustainable. The only thing it can produce is poverty, debt, and more crisis, not to mention war. We must fiercely oppose military Keynesianism, and we must replace it with a massive green investment program that combines development with degrowth. On dignity, let us campaign for a new monetary commons that sidelines private banks, offers a trust fund for everyone, and guarantees a universal dividend, call it a universal basic income, to each. On the big thorny issue of migration, let us turn the accusation of us being soft on foreigners into a virtue. Let us shout it from the rooftops that Europe without mass migration will die, it will perish, it will not be viable. Let us proclaim that we want migrants, not out of solidarity, but out of self-interest. In the last 9 years, Europe refused to democratize, and therefore today it is disintegrating. It is degenerating into a totalitarian war union. You can see that, you can smell it. This is what happens when you have austerity for the many and money printing as if there's no tomorrow for the very few. Mixed with this austerity, you have mind-numbing surges of inequality.
The Ukraine war has always been a proxy war by the United States against Europe. And in that regard, it has been a very successful war. From the perspective of the A-national OCGFC, the Ukraine war served at least two functions. First, the destabilization of Europe, and second, the strengthening of BRICS, which included for example, the creation and the proliferation of alternatives to SWIFT, different trading systems and so forth, the boosting of BRICS economies like India, like South Africa, like China, like the GCC and so on, as well as Russia, as a result of the Russian sanctions, as well as advancing a sort of division of the globe into spheres of influence, with the global north, the west, and so forth, Europe and the European continent falling under American influence, and the rest of the world being for BRICS, the global south being for BRICS, or to simplify it, for China. The Ukraine war has been immensely powerful and immensely useful in accelerating the transition of the global economy that I've always been talking about. So what they are there to discuss in Riyadh, in my opinion, doesn't have so much to do with Ukraine as it has to do with managing the next steps of that transition. So the US is going to want to maintain the dependence of Europe. And that means negotiating the issue of Russian energy, because the only way to keep Europe energy dependent on the United States, which it is now, is to keep Russia or Russian energy out of the European market. See, it's a bit of a tricky thing for Russia because they're a major member of BRICS, but Russia is not a global south country geographically. So that means that Russia is going to share the global north. Basically, it's going to be shared between America and Russia, with the lines of those spheres of influence basically following the Soviet era pattern. I mean, peace and harmony between Russia and Europe is in the interests of both Russia and Europe, obviously, but not so much in the interests of the US, and not so much, arguably, not so much in the interests of BRICS. If Russia is allowed to normalize completely with Europe and become their major energy supplier, then that would drive the US out of the European market, and it would decrease Russia's vested interests in the success of BRICS itself, the BRICS project. So potentially resolving the Ukraine conflict could undo a lot of the progress that has been made towards the transition of the global economy. And I don't think anybody wants that. I don't think even Russia wants that. Now also, of course, for the GCC, for Saudi Arabia, they have a vested interest in all of this as well, because the lifting of sanctions against Russian energy would impact their own market share. Not Saudi Arabia so much, but the GCC, their own market share in Europe and elsewhere. So in other words, what the Riyadh meeting was about, in my opinion, and what the upcoming meeting in Saudi Arabia between Trump and Putin will be about, essentially, isn't Ukraine, but it's negotiating the terms and setting up the dividing lines for the respective spheres of influence. Now, let me be clear here. These negotiations in Riyadh are not negotiations between enemies. These are not negotiations between people who are or who have radically conflicting views of the future. No. As I've said many times, Donald Trump is a representative of the A-national OCGFC. Putin and MBS are among the major leaders of the global transition of the global economy. And they are among those who will be the leaders in the new management system of international affairs. See, in the global south, as I've talked about before, business, the private sector, remains subordinate to the state for the most part. Or anyway, compared to the US and Europe, it's subordinate to the state. Compared to the US and Europe, where the state is subordinate to business. The A-national OCGFC are the product of the subordination of state power in the West to the private sector. That's why the A-national OCGFC exists. But when the A-national OCGFC deal with China, or they deal with Russia, or they deal with the GCC, they're dealing with players who hold power in both the private sector and in the state. And those players operate more according to nationalistic interests. They're sort of a regional, nationalistic OCGFC in their own right. So unlike a Trump or a Biden or, any political leader in the West, a Putin, for example, is genuinely interested in the prosperity and the security of Russia. Xi Jinping is interested in China. MBS is interested in Saudi Arabia, and he's interested in the region, and so on. So they have a nationalistic element to them. Whereas Western leaders do not care about their countries. You see what I mean? So for instance, when Trump goes to Riyadh, he's not representing America, and he's not representing American interests. He's representing the A-National OCGFC, the A-National Owners and Controllers of Global Financialized Capital. But Putin and MBS are representing the interests of their countries and the interests of their countries' private sector elites. And this is the whole negotiation that's going on over the transition of the global economy. This is the whole negotiation. It's between the A-National OCGFC coming from the West and the regional, more nationalistic OCGFC of different parts of the global South. And they're discussing how the global economy is going to be managed, how it's going to be managed between these factions. So for Trump, or whoever else might be in the White House at any given point, their only nationalistic concern will have to do with the military-industrial complex, which does continue to be, an economic force, and a force in American politics and policy making, though much less than in the past. So as I see it, they have at least two major issues to work out in Riyadh: the future of Europe and the future of the Middle East. The future of the Middle East obviously includes what to do about Israel and what to do about Gaza, which is why Stephen Witkoff was in Riyadh. I mean, he's Trump's envoy to the Middle East. He's the one who got Netanyahu to agree to the ceasefire. He has nothing to do with Ukraine. There's no real reason why he should be there, except that they're going to discuss the Middle East. So in my opinion, they're going to be talking about this. And they will be talking about this when they meet the next time. And because all of these issues are connected in one way or another. Europe, Ukraine, Russian energy exports, and the Middle East, Gaza, Israel, Palestine, and so forth. In all of these issues, there are possible trade-offs. Possible trade-offs exist. These are all bargaining chips. So if you look at what each side wants to achieve in these negotiations, Trump, as a representative of the A-National OCGFC, he will want to keep Europe dependent on American energy exports. He will want animosity to continue between Russia and Europe, but with the United States sitting it out on the bench. He'll want the price of energy to decrease for his own domestic popularity, and he'll want access to Ukraine's minerals. He'll want Europe to become dependent also on weapons from the U.S., from U.S. manufacturers, and he'll want Europe to be cut off from China as much as possible. Further than that, he'll want guarantees that he's going to have a share. He himself and his family will have a share in the development of Gaza. He will want the global transition to proceed. He will want American containment to proceed. And he'll want the continued move towards de-dollarization. Don't believe the hype. And he'll want conflict in Europe and so on. So his bargaining chips in the negotiation are the Russian sanctions, U.S. trade policy towards China, American support for Israel, and their military posturing about Iran, among other things. For Russia, they will want control over the Ukraine. They will want restored access to the energy markets of Europe. And they want generally normalization of trade and business for all Russian companies. This is what Russia would like. Saudi Arabia will want continued access to European energy markets for the GCC. They will want to make sure that Russia's interest and commitment to BRICS will be preserved, and they'll want the establishment of a Palestinian state with Israel defanged. And of course, they'll want guarantees from the U.S. that there will be no interference by them in Bilad al-Sham and in the broader Middle East, Syria, Iraq, and so on. Like I said, the U.S., or rather the A-National OCGFC, they want Europe to remain dependent, specifically on American energy. That's going to mean trying to limit Russian influence in European markets and trying to keep the EU on a short leash. They don't want Europe to be completely, destroyed, but they do want for Europe to be weakened, and they want Europe to be subordinate. They want it to be controlled. They want it to be completely within their sphere of influence. Second, they will want, as I say, Ukraine's resources, the minerals, the agricultural land, the energy reserves, and so on. This all has to be brought under Western corporate control. And this is what they want. And they want to keep China at a distance from Europe. The global economy is shifting, and Washington is trying to ensure that Europe won't gain any autonomy through building a relationship with China. So what kind of a deal should we expect? Most likely, Russia will keep the territories that they have taken, but they will allow Western economic access to Ukraine's resources. They'll go along with whatever deal is made between the U.S. and the Ukrainians with regards to that. The U.S. will drop their own support for Ukraine, but Europe most likely will continue to support Ukraine to ensure that the war just sort of drags on but never reaches a definitive conclusion and potentially can ignite conflicts elsewhere. Possibly some sanctions against Russia will be lifted, especially where it benefits multinational corporations. I think that energy prices will probably be stabilized for the right people. Oil prices will probably want to stay within a controlled range, as they always have, so that Saudi Arabia and Russia and the U.S. Corporate interests all benefit, not America itself, but their corporate interests. Russia will probably retain limited access to the European market in terms of energy, but only in a way that doesn't undermine America's energy dominance. Just it's been the case like this all along, actually. Europe is going to be further weakened, and they're going to be further tied to the U.S. The U.S. will ensure that Europe remains militarily dependent upon the U.S. U.S. weapons manufacturers, increasing their purchases and so on of weapons, of American weapons. European industries are going to be completely locked into American energy supplies, preventing them from pivoting to Russia or to China. I think BRICS will continue to grow. The U.S. isn't interested in stopping BRICS expansion, but they will work behind the scenes to try to keep it somewhat financially fragmented. Saudi Arabia is going to stay aligned with BRICS, but they will also maintain their ties to Western financial systems. They're going to work on some sort of a deal about Gaza. I think that the U.S. and the Gulf are going to take control of the reconstruction with Gulf financing and with some American partners being involved. But I think that the plan for the Middle East, the plan for Gaza, the plan for Palestine, and that whole region is basically being worked out to the exclusion of the U.S. I think Saudi Arabia is going to have the major say over the political landscape in Gaza, alongside Egypt.
You're learning so many important things, and I'm so proud of you.
Indem sie sich im Iran diesen Strukturen unterworfen haben.
Frau Kollegin, erlauben Sie eine Zwischenfrage von Frau von Storch.
Ach nee.
Jedes Mal, wenn hier eine Frau redet, dann macht der arrogante Zwischenrufe, dieser Macho, das ist sowas von wenig zu ertragen und kraut sich da seine Eier. Das geht überhaupt nicht mehr.
Wer belastet so spät den Bundestag? Es ist die Fraktion, die keiner mag. Sie stellt einen Antrag, dem du nicht entkommst. Wir lehnen ihn ab. Ja, was denn auch sonst? Einen schönen Abend noch.
Dass jeder Perversling in Zukunft in ihre Schutzräume eindringen kann, wenn er einfach nur behauptet, eine Frau zu sein.
Würden Sie bitte zur Sache reden, Herr Hilse? Das hat mit dem Energiewirtschaftsrecht nichts zu tun.
Dass Ihr Entwurf hier verfassungswidrig ist. Also völliger Unsinn, jetzt hier so zu argumentieren. Machen Sie lieber Ihre Arbeit richtig. Und hören Sie mir mal zu, dann können Sie nämlich noch was lernen über die Verfassung.
Herr Dürr, es ist Ihnen wahrscheinlich vorhin nicht aufgefallen, aber Sie haben in Ihrer Rede Herrn Merz mit Herrn Merkel angesprochen. Ich gehe davon aus, dass beide, Frau Merkel und auch Herr Merz, es von sich weisen würden, miteinander verheiratet zu sein.
Dass Sie hoffen, dass ich den Linken ein paar Ohrfeigen verpasse.
Ich kann Ihnen auch, Herr Biermann, mit einem Hinweis auf unsere Geschäftsordnung helfen. Sobald Sie für den Deutschen Bundestag kandidieren und gewählt werden, dürfen Sie hier auch reden. Heute sind Sie zum Singen eingeladen.
Der lärmende Fehlstart, den Ihre aus linksgrünen Betonköpfen und umgefallenen Liberalen zusammengezimmerte Regierung hingelegt hat, sucht seinesgleichen.